The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
And we're going to spend the next few minutes talking with three of our CIG experts and just get a real ping of the highest on their radar right now. What is it when it comes to cyber?
Yeah, Deborah Plunkett has served as a cybersecurity leader. She's got more than 30 years of experience in cyber. She also served as former director of information assurance at the National Security Agency, and she's currently principal of Plunkett Associates. She also serves on the advisory board of the International Consortium for Minority Cybersecurity Professionals and served on the National Security Council at the White House in 2 separate administrations.
And I'll just jump in. We've got Frank Salufo also, who serves as the director of Auburn's University McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security. He has decades of national and homeland security experience and served as a special assistant to the Homeland Security to President Bush immediately following 9/11. He also recently received as a commissioner on the cyberspace solarium.
Yeah, that's right. And Steve Hill is Global Head of Technology, Cyber, and Third-Party Risk at Credit Suisse. He retired as Deputy Director in the UK National Security Secretariat of the Cabinet Office in 2017. That almost rivals your title, Matt. He served for over 3 decades as well at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, dealing with international security, intelligence threats, including terrorism and proliferation. I want to thank you all for being here. I think collectively, this is almost 100 years of experience. And so I'm really interested in kind of tapping into what all of you have to say. And Matt, I'll turn it over to you for to fire off first question here.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to just have this be the same way we use our huddles for our planning meetings, and just start off by asking each of you a sense of what's on top of mind of you for cyber right now. And I'll just turn to you, Debbie. Would you like to start us off? Oh, Debbie, I think you're muted.
I've become an expert at reading body language since COVID. So
yeah, there we go. Are we there?
Yep.
Great.
Yep. Sorry about that. Took a minute. So thanks for having me. It's great to be here and great to be among these great luminaries, and especially at this time of year as we are beginning to wrap up 12 months of exciting opportunities to excel in the cyberspace. So top of mind for me as we wind down the year continues to be for me the importance of collaborations. Mm-hmm. And I have seen collaborations in some really exciting ways this year. We always talk about public-private partnerships. That's like the buzzword forever and ever and ever. But I'll tell you, I've seen some great private-to-private partnerships that have competitors partnering to solve tough problems, or to work with a victim entity to try to solve their problem together, giving each other credit openly, talking about the strengths of one another and best ways to collaborate. And that is so refreshing to me, because it really demonstrates and reinforces the fact that this is a really tough problem, and that the only way we're really going to get on top of it is if we work collaboratively together. And of course, it's business opportunity. And so, competition will continue to exist, and we want it to, because that's how we get the best ideas. But when the chips are down, working together is the way to go. And so that's top of mind. And so I look forward to continued opportunities for those collaborations in the new year in 2023. And then just, eyes wide open. We can't let our guards down by any stretch. Bad things continue to happen every single day on networks. And some of it we hear about, some of it we don't hear about. But make no mistake, they continue to happen. And crafty adversaries, nation states, criminals continue to consider it a ripe environment to take advantage and to gain advantage. And so we have to continue to work really hard to make sure that we try to stay a step ahead.
Right.
And sobering words, Matt. I was just going to say, as we look at 2023, and I just real quickly before I jump in here to your note, Debbie, I think just seeing at this year's Cipher Brief Threat Conference, we had Microsoft on stage with Recorded Future, with CrowdStrike and with Mandiant, and just the four of them being on stage, kind of having the conversation about what these new alliances need to look like and how competition has to have a place. And it does, to your point, Debbie. I just think it's fantastic and really important. So I don't know. I felt like I just needed to jump in there. Matt, I'm going to stop stepping on you.
No problem. So let me shift over to Frank and get your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Suzanne, and congrats again for an amazing conference today. Thrilled to be part of it. I think Deborah nailed it. Clearly, when you're looking at public-private partnerships, I think we're finally at the point that we're translating some of the decades-old nouns into actual verbs. It's going to take some time still, and I mean, you can have all the mechanisms in place, but to me, trust is still the coin of the realm, and trust takes a long time to build, and it can evaporate just like that. And I think we still have a ways to go there, but I think the JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, and a couple of these other efforts that are going beyond information sharing. We've been talking about this forever, to actual sitting in foxholes, looking at ways to be able to operationalize some of these challenges together. So I think we're finally over the premise that government lead, private sector follow. For us to move the needle on this one, it's got to be a joint collaborative, and it's got to be true, real, scar tissue, facing the same problems and addressing those problems collectively, and recognizing we're going to make some mistakes along the way. So the reality is we do need to err on the side of action and not inaction. And to me, that only takes, that will require actual collaborative operational environments. In terms of the threat, China, and Russia, Iran, North Korea. I think the great powers competition set of issues, we've seen significant change in terms of countries that are actually integrating computer network attack and exploit into their warfighting strategy and doctrine. So it's not just this broad cyber threat sets of issues. You're actually seeing those that are integrating that into their tactics and their broader TTPs, I think, sit at the very top. And when you look at it from an existential perspective, obviously China is our near peer competitor in every category. And I am, just like everyone else, trying to read the tea leaves in terms of how he is analyzing the war in Ukraine and Russia's activities there. So that set of challenges is a huge set of issues. We get that, but it's almost as important to recognize what are Xi's, what is he reading into that? What are the implications for Taiwan? And I think this clearly touches on the issues that both John and Sue eloquently raised in terms of where go the data, supply chains, and when you get down to it, we do not have visibility at this point on our supply chains in any sort of comprehensive or holistic way. We can do a great job when we see a particular threat emanating, but day to day, that's still something, after every breach, every company is spending a whole lot of time trying to figure out what they have inside their boxes. And we've got to get to a point where that is not reactive, but proactive. And again, I'm going to underscore, can't do this through government alone. You can have all the exquisite capabilities, but it's the private sector that owns and operates a vast majority of the infrastructures and have to be part of that solution. So I probably went on too long, but I think Deborah conveyed it much better than I did.
No, that was excellent. Steve, let's get you.
So I'm going to strike a slightly different, more optimistic note. I think the most interesting thing from this year has been the lessons that we can draw from the war in Ukraine. I think we're against the backdrop of a decade of scaremongering, you could say. I mean, where we all assumed a kind of offensive advantage. We all saw through COVID and spoke about our expanding attack surfaces. But my observation is that I think we begin now to have learned what the right cocktail of measures is, from preventing and all the way through to responding, and the new focus on resilience. We are in a learning culture. There is no silver bullet, no panacea, but it feels to me that we're now moving from a phase of kind of conceptual challenge to execution challenge. And we sort of now know essentially what we should be doing. And certainly as I look forward to 2023, in a big bank where, you know, we have challenges, actually it's mainly a challenge of doing things. And if you look at Ukraine and the success I think that they have had, I think there's some clear lessons that read across from that. And to me, that's the most interesting thing from this year. I think first of all, their intelligence-led approach. You know, they learned from the power attacks they had in eastern Ukraine in 2016, from the NotPetya attack, and then from the attacks, I mean, at the threat conference earlier this year, talking about the lessons that by the fact that they were attacked, you know, a month before by the Russians, they learned from that. They then got the support from the likes of Microsoft and Recorded Future to be able to act upon that both strategically and operationally, tactically. Secondly, things like their adoption of Starlink, to me, were really innovative. I mean, none of us saw that coming. And that agility and ability to innovate, we've normally thought about the attackers having that. But I think the Ukrainians have shown us that we in defense can also have that. Then, of course, that what Deborah and Frank have been talking about, the public-private partnership, the team approach. I mean, I think, you know, that's almost a given now. But finally, and probably the most difficult one for us to all achieve, is about having a joint culture, a clear purpose. The Ukrainian people, you know, from the bottom to the top, share that sense of strategic purpose. And I think that cultural side is what has really made them successful. I think that you have that in some places. Our challenge, and certainly for the global financial sector, which I think is pretty good at cybersecurity broadly, but we live in this wider ecosystem. We have all kinds of reliances and dependencies on the sort of happy fragility that was built up previously, and that's what we've now got to kind of try and extend all those good lessons and lessons that have been learnt in Ukraine, and I think also some lessons that have been learnt in the global banks, and extend that out to the rest of the economy.
Susan, can I jump in on that? Because I think Steve is right. I mean, for years we've said the initiative remains with the attacker, and I still think red has an edge. But it's the first time I've had a little bit of confidence that done right, and let me tell you, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, tears, scar tissue to do it right. So don't think that they just started last year. The Ukrainians have been at this for a while, with support from others, and clearly the public-private partnership is working. But for the first time in a long time, I think blue does have a fighting chance done right. The problem is it's not an end game, it's not an end state, it's a consistent, it's a journey. We turn our eyes, we drop the ball, and we're in the same place we were 3 years ago. So I just wanted to add that, because I do think there is, I've been told the pessimist is an optimist with experience. I'm somewhat optimistic, believe it or not, but I do think there is there are some good undercurrents here, but I don't want to read into that that we can go back to business as usual. That's all.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Frank. And to me, there used to be the trope that there were those people who'd been attacked and those people that didn't know that they'd yet been attacked. I think the division now is between those people that take this seriously and do it properly, and those people that are simply unaware and don't think about it, don't make those hard decisions. I think that's now the division.
Roger that.
Debbie,
I was going to bring in Deborah with this. Part of the conversation we just had was that culture of security, because that's the people quotient, and that's probably the hardest thing. The good news is we've got a lot of C-suite attention pre-Ukraine with ransomware. So we had their attention and we had that momentum. And as we saw these geopolitical events take hold, it was an additional drumbeat that we had to look at our own operations and our own people and say, do we have a culture of security? Have you seen some changes there?
I really have, and I can speak from experience. in the boardroom, because that's where a lot of the decisions are made for corporate entities. And I see significant engagement in the boardroom on topics of cybersecurity, from education and training to scenarios, to having real tough discussions about resources, about response options, about who has authority for what. I mean, these are all things you want to happen, so that when, not if, but when a bad thing might happen, the company is prepared. And so I am encouraged. I am really very encouraged. We used to talk a lot about, you got to know what you have before you can defend it, right? And so I think, taking that inventory has now become a little bit more commonplace. And now we have to take the next step and, plan for what might be the inevitable, making sure that we have the right, I always say, make sure you have your favorite cybersecurity company on speed dial. That's sort of my favorite line. And you're a lawyer, by the way, too, because some bad thing may happen, and every company is not poised or resourced to be able to have that expert company on constant retainer. But being able to pick up the phone and call someone when you're in trouble is critically important. So I'm encouraged, Matt. I think that we're moving into a good space. Lots of good discussions are happening, and there's a little bit of oh boy, we got to get this together. But that's all good. That's what you want.
Yeah, Matt, I think you had a good follow-up question.
Yeah, and when we start talking about culture and getting our folks in line, we're really talking, like Frank said, about being retroactive and not proactive, because we're looking at what we know. We have things we don't want to step on a rake. So when we start looking proactively, part of what we heard from Sue was sort of the challenge around cryptography and looking at quantum. Are there any emerging technologies or emerging domains that are top of mind for any of you that you'd like to jump in with? I'll just turn to Frank. Frank, is there anything that jumps off the page for you?
Yeah, a lot of issues, but I think there's a way to think about it. And Suzanne, you used those terms when you wrapped up your conversation with Sue. And I think we're at the point where we can't treat cyber as a standalone, separate black magic. In other words, it is part and parcel. You can't look at cyber in isolation of broader geopolitical events. You can't look at cyber in isolation of economic events. So it is now embedded and integrated into the fabric of how we think. Technology changes, human nature remains consistent. I don't care what it is, you can go all throughout time, and it's often in the application of technologies that you see game changers. It's not always the tech. You can look at old technologies that are used in a new way that can be really confounding and disruptive from a blue perspective, from a defensive perspective. But clearly there are some game changers out there. And you've got one set of issues, death by paper cut. Are you seeing ransomware hitting these epidemic proportions? One of the things I'm really curious to look at, and history is too early to be able to tell, but I think some of our economic measures in terms of sanctions in Russia have actually curtailed and hurt some of the ransomware operators, because they're all provided safe haven in Russia, or they're more focused on trying to do the bidding of Mother Russia. But one thing or another, so there's that paper cut set of issues, and then there are the transformative sets of issues. And clearly, we talked about some of them. Quantum, that is the game changer. From an intelligence perspective, it is the new SIGINT, and it can change everything in terms of how we do things. So we can't afford to lose that race. AI, beyond the buzz, but actually applying it in day-to-day environments. And the thing that I'm spending a lot of time on right now is the convergence of space and cyber. The reality is we are 100% dependent upon not only the old military space, but commercial space. And in terms of positioning, navigation, timing, signaling, PNT sets of issues, our entire economy is 100% dependent upon space working. And the reality is we have a whole lot more to do there in terms of unpacking that, looking at governance structures, looking at critical infrastructure designations and the like. So those are the three that jump to mind for me. But it's also in the integration. I just don't want people to lose the fact that it's not always the technology, it's how it's being applied.
I'm going to jump in with a question here, and then Matt, I'm going to let you kind of close out the conversation. But Debbie, you mentioned the importance of collaborations. Frank, you talked about trust being really the coin of the realm here. And Steve, you talked about the joint cultural strategic purpose that has to come into play. So I just want to ask each of you for your thoughts on how do we build on the successes we've seen so far? Like, what would next steps be in your mind? Frank, do you want to lead off?
I've never had an unspoken thought, fine, but I'd like to hear from. So I mean, the workforce issue is vexing, it's huge, and the reality is no matter what we put in place right now, we're trying to incrementally move the needle. I genuinely feel to be able to get to the good place we all want to be, this has to be K through 12. It has to be at a very young level. And again, it's not only to build these cyber ninjas, it's for everyone to have cyber awareness. Because at the end of the day, it's not called the CISO alone. It's everyone. I mean, you just look at the numbers are staggering. 88% of all breaches are still going to be at the pointy end of a phishing sort of expedition, and even at the high level. So I don't mean to go too long on this. I'd like to see more diversity in the workforce. Women, it's still, the numbers are scarce, and we've got to do better than that. Color, people of color, they need to be part of the solution set. Neurodiverse individuals, that to me could be a game changer. You've got a lot of brilliant women and men that society has cast out that could be hugely supportive and beneficial of the broader cybersecurity community. So I'll leave it at that. But I do want to say I am an optimist. So all things said and done, I think we're making some progress.
Important ways to build on it. Debbie, what do you think?
Wow. So Frank got them all, really. So here's what I'd say. I've just finished this morning grading papers for a capstone graduate course in cybersecurity, and the theme was capacity building for the paper and the importance of capacity building. And I couldn't have picked a better way to spend my morning than to answer this question, because for me, it really is about capacity building. And Frank called out all of the different segments that are underrepresented that we need to spend more time on. And I would just foot stomp the importance of getting this in at younger ages. Our 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are more adept at using an iPad than many of us. I'll say me, I'll be okay with that. And yet we are not exposing them appropriately early enough in their academic learnings to the importance of cybersecurity, not just from their own protection and safety, but getting them excited about the possibilities, and that to serve in this community as they grow old, and providing opportunities at the middle school level. I believe Blue Voyant was just on a short while ago. They sponsor a great summer program where they brought inner city kids in from around the local area, gave them a grant and stipend so they didn't have to work, and had them do some really cool cybersecurity work. Then they got to present it. I mean, these are the kinds of things that garner interest. So important to our ability to be able to build capacity, particularly in neighborhoods that might not be exposed as much to cybersecurity. And so I would really, AI, absolutely. And quantum, yes, everybody's worried about quantum. I think we've got some time there, but.
Yeah, according to Sue, about a decade, but we can't take our eye off that ball, as you mentioned, Debbie. Steve, joint cultural strategic purpose. How do we take what we have right now and build on it?
So I think we're winning this heart and mind battle. I think we're making progress at board level and all the way through to a younger generation. And if we can win that battle of the why is this important, then the how becomes much easier. I look at my own family. I've got 3 kind of liberal arts, young 20s. all three of my children are going into cybersecurity or in technology, having come from kind of doing liberal arts degrees. I think people are seeing that this is one of those places that you want to be in the tech companies in this kind of sphere. I think one of the challenges is the how and explaining it. I think we're still, as an industry, really bad at introducing unnecessary complexity. Most of the boards I deal with, they want to just know, well, what do you want me to do? Just tell me in straightforward. And sometimes we're really bad at explaining that. And I think there is also an element where, because we're fascinated by quantum and these kind of zero-day esoteric threats, we forget that actually that's not our main challenge. The main challenge are the things today and next year and the year after, not in a decade's time. And as Frank said, most of the attacks are still depressingly kind of old-fashioned in what they use and how they do it. So for me, we explain why this is important. I think we're winning that. I think there's still a ways to go on, telling people actually, well, in practical terms, what do you now need to do? It's not about necessarily putting yourself in a position for quantum in a decade's time, or about buying the kind of Gucci product that looks really great and uses AI and quantum and all those other things. It's about getting those basics right and telling people how to do that.
All right. So looking forward, as we talked about with some of the emerging technologies, are there any new partnerships that you would like to see? So we've talked about how we've seen things like competitors working together and government leaning in. I think the challenge has always been information sharing with context. Is there any particular partnership you'd like to see spun up? And I'll just open the floor if anyone has one.
So from my perspective, I think that there are some bridges that we need to build. I think the regulated industries, I mean, even though everyone likes to beat up on the regulators, they have pushed things in the right direction. And I think the unregulated industries sometimes represent a weaker link at the moment. And I think there's still probably more. I think the UK-US kind of represent a great sort of international cooperation model, spreading that out to the rest of the world, because a lot of our supply chains are in that rest of the world. That still does represent a challenge for us.
Mm-hmm.
So just a couple of very quick thoughts. There are sectors that are nowhere as far along as they ought to be. I think of agriculture, I think of water. Healthcare is catching up because they had no choice. So when I look at what partnerships looking for need to look like, it need to be the sectors that haven't paid any attention, but our economy, our society, our way of life is potentially negatively impacted. So I think that's where I would start. And then the JCDC, which I referenced, how do you scale that? I mean, it's still a little bit of an inside club. I envision a day where cyber intelligence is a public good. The reality is everyone needs to have at least some basics. That doesn't mean, no offense to all the good companies that are out there, they'll still have very unique capabilities and services to provide. But I think some of the blocking and tackling and basics ought to be made available to everyone that can use it. So I see the sectors that are kind of neglected, and water, ag, we've got to do more there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
No, I don't. I don't have much to add to what my colleagues have already said. But I would say that we need to get to a point, and I believe we're moving in that direction, where we don't have cyber over here and name it over here. There needs to be an integration, a thorough integration. And so when we talk about instruments of national power, it naturally appears not as this extra special thing that only certain people can handle or do, but truly as an instrument that can be used at the national level in order to protect and defend us. And similarly, just really across the board on the IT space, and those that are developing and creating the next generation of X, cyber ought to be integrated. We shouldn't have to question that. We shouldn't have to ask, did you or is it? It just ought to be in that. There shouldn't be a separate budget for it, right? It should be integrated to me. And that, okay, well maybe
I'm not
Frank
sure I
doesn't
agree with that. They
Frank
kill
does
that
not agree with that.
one.
I'm dreaming, right? So so that it would be, because, you know, I know exactly where you're headed with that, and I understand that. But I just think that will institutionalize it to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that integration, I mean, Steve, to your point, there are still boards in some places that are unaware, companies, businesses that are unaware. And it would be nice at some point to say, we've had these conversations for so long. If you're not going to get on board, you're going to be left behind. But this isn't really an environment where we can afford to leave anybody behind because of the interconnectedness of the cyber threats. So, I mean, I guess one question would be for me, what hasn't been done in terms of educating people on the importance of this that could be done, and how might we get there? I think that, you know, we're going to be hearing later today from Mark Montgomery, who's got some interesting ideas on how using cloud providers and businesses moving to the cloud can actually help, you know, create better cybersecurity for the future. And I'm going to let him connect those dots for us during that conversation. But I'm wondering, do we need to be thinking more creatively about how we use what we have today and really educate people on the importance of this, because we're all at risk.
So this is ironic, given that we're at a sort of cyber huddle, a cyber conference day, but to some extent, it's much better and more effective if we can have cyber as on the agenda of the bigger meeting with the board members, rather than just a dialogue between CISOs or between those people that are working in the field. And that's a challenge, but that's something that we just have to push forward.
Yeah. Debbie, did you have thoughts?
I don't think this is a shortage of information. This is not a shortage of know-how. This isn't a shortage of capability. It is will. And so I believe, you know, companies, entities, responsible owners of networks and data have to have the will, because if they have the will, then the information that they would need to be informed and to be able to make the right decisions it is available, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Matt, any closing questions?
I was going to kind of channel everyone's inner Director Inglis. I mean, the point he makes so eloquently is that we really have to make every network we are leveraging on as a critical function defendable. You know, it can't just be that everyone has to lock arms and become this great wall that cannot be knocked down. It has to be something that can take a hit, but there's a resiliency model that we have to continually improve. And just to pass it around the room, if anyone has any closing thoughts around that, I think that's really where we're looking to make a lot of our critical infrastructure partners in industry stand out.
Yeah, Matt, I'll jump on that initially. I mean, two things I am also looking forward to in the not too distant future is the national strategy coming out of the National Cyber Directorate. And I have all the optimism in the world in terms of Chris's leadership and the team he's built at NCD. So that the other thing is the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. We're losing a couple of big titans on Capitol Hill, Jim Langevin, John Katko, Ben Sass. I don't know who picks up the mantle, because if I look back, this past year was the year that we actually got legislation passed into law. So there's no, when you were asking what's left to be done, a lot, we do finally have it codified into law. So that's a good positive place to be. But I think you nailed, again, it's a way of thinking. We're not going to prevent everything. We're never going to be able to preempt everything. At the end of the day, we've got to get to the point where we can build resilience, take a punch, and make sure we not only bounce back, but hopefully bounce forward. And when we start looking at some of our expenditures, we shouldn't just be backfilling. We should be with the view toward actually building not only safer, but better. So if we can get smart, I mean, think about all these communities that have been destroyed by natural disasters. Not too many of them built in whole new ways of thinking about how to deal with crises. But in Japan, they've done that post-Fukushima with earthquakes. You've got sort of buildings on wheels. We've got to think a little differently, but it really gets to Deb's point, it can't just be the cyber community talking to the cyber community and talking about cyber. It's how it can be integrated into smart budgeting, smart planning, and ultimately with an eye toward resilience.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid we have to wrap it up there, everyone. I really want to thank you so much, all of our SIG principals and experts for this huddle. It's great to know what's top of mind for each of you right now as we wrap up 2022 and kind of figure out what 2023 is going to look like in terms of risk and opportunities in the new year. I do want to point out, you know, we mentioned Chris Inglis and his, I guess, mantra of you have to beat all of us to beat one of us. And I think that's what you were referring to earlier, Matt. I mean, I think it's brilliant and it's been accepted by so many across the board. And that is just a quick little tease here. The key piece of our new digital magazine that's coming out tomorrow, that's our lead story. So nobody else knows that. And I probably wasn't supposed to say it, but whatever. So I'm interested in digging in on more of everything you had to say. I have a lot of notes here. So thank you. This is how we move the ball forward. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure and privilege being here. Thank you.
Pleasure.